1 week season.
What is going on, OWS fam? Welcome to the week 15 edition of the OWS Angles podcast. I am your host. I am your guest. I am JMToWin. As always, throw this baby on 1.5x speed or 2x speed. And let's get started with an exploration of a very unique slate this week. So we are past the bye weeks. We've got a double Monday night slate this week. So 12 games on the main slate, not quite the 13 games that we have when we have the largest workload on a main slate that we have, I guess, barring that week 18 slate where we have even more than that, but not quite the largest set of games that we can typically have, but pretty close to it with 12 games, 24 teams. And yet this is an interesting slate where you go through it. So my journey through this slate this week was going game by game, doing the research and kind of narrowing down my list. And as I got deeper into the games, realizing, man, my pool of players really isn't that big. And then when I kind of pulled all my game research and looked at my pool of players, we're like, not only is it not that big, but it's not really that confident in terms of, yeah, these are the best plays on the slate, but they're not plays that I'm particularly excited about playing. And then looking at ownership projections was kind of that next step in the process for me, and realizing, okay, like a lot of the plays that I like as uninspiring best plays on the slate are coming in with the highest ownership or among the highest ownership, alongside other plays that are kind of equally uninspiring on this slate. And I think that really informs what we should be looking for on this slate in terms of how we make our pathway to a first place finish. So if you're new to this podcast, or if you're relatively new to this podcast, if you are looking for a picks podcast, you're in the wrong place. This is not what we will be doing here. I do have my player pool that comes out toward the end of Friday in the scroll on 1 week season called my player grid. So the scroll is an article on the site where you have all of your late week content. And you can kind of scroll through it all or jump to whichever article you want to jump to. So we have my player pool. We have Sonic's MME player pool. We have Mike's player pool that also focuses on FanDuel. We have other player pool content, but obviously a large part of what we're focused on at OWS is the strategy and the strategy required on that particular week in order to win a tournament, because DFS is not a game of picking players. DFS is a game of strategy. And on this particular week, even more than normal, DFS is probably not going to be a game of picking players, but is instead going to be a game of strategy. So today, we always use this Angles podcast to, as we say, every week in DFS is its own unique puzzle. And we like to use the Angles podcast to try to discern what the picture on the puzzle box looks like, to get us started down the pathway of how we want to be thinking about this slate, how we want to be building through the slate, how we want to be maximizing our pathways to a first place finish on this slate. And on this particular week, I think that the way that we started really informs what we should be thinking about in this regard, in that it was kind of interesting, right? Because the first few games that I wrote up on the slate were games that had more pieces in them than most of the later games that I wrote up. So I wrote up the first 3 or 4 games in the NFL Edge, my DFS interpretations for those games, and was like, okay, there's kind of stuff in every game here. And then I went through a barren stretch of I don't know, 4 or 5 games where there was hardly anything that I liked. And then all of a sudden I've got 3 or 4 games left on the entire slate to write up. And then thinking, okay, well, some of these will be gold mines for potential production, the Lions and Bills game and a couple others, and then kind of got to those games and was like, oh, they really don't stand out that much for DFS in terms of what we're spending for salary, what we're getting from these plays. And so it is a week where, from my perspective, we have 12 games, we have 24 teams, we have more options than normal, and yet my pool is smaller than normal. And even that small pool is less confident than my typical pool would be. And that's not a function of, that's a function of what the slate provides, right? That's not a function of how I'm seeing the slate or what my research was like this week. And so now I should start looking at different angles and creating some level of confidence on certain plays. Instead, that's information for us to take and say, oh, okay, this is this type of week. This is a week where our highest confidence plays probably aren't that high confidence. And that means that the highest confidence plays for the field, the highest confidence plays in terms of ownership are not necessarily that high confidence. And so maybe there's a different path to a first place finish outside of just what's standing out on paper. So what I want to do is look at some of the ownership that we're seeing on quarterbacks, on running backs, on wide receivers, and kind of talk through some guys who are coming in higher owned and some of the flaws on those players. And then some of the guys who are coming in lower owned and some of the bull cases for those players. So a lot of the players who are coming in lower owned are coming in lower owned for a reason. They're coming in lower owned because they're a little bit less likely to hit than the players that are coming in higher owned. But the plays that are coming in higher owned are less likely to hit than a typical chalk week. And therefore, there's more fragility at the top of ownership projections than there typically would be. And that means that getting to some of these lower owned plays that are just slight underdogs to outperform those higher owned plays, or that are maybe favorites to outperform those under owned plays, but are overpriced for the production that we expect, that can really open doors to tournament wins on this particular week. So the story last week was, did you get enough of the 40-point scores? There were so many of them. Josh Allen put up 50 plus. Puka put up over 40. Charbonnet put up over 40. Justin Jefferson put up over 35. Jordan Addison put up over 40. And the question was, did you get enough of these 35, 40-point scores on your roster together? This week, the story might end up being similar. Surprisingly, maybe we get a bunch of high scores across this slate. But what's likely to happen is the story of this week is going to be, what were the different things that you did that ended up being right? Because there's going to be a lot of popular things that end up being wrong just by the nature of how fragile these popular plays are this week, just by the nature of what this slate provides. So we're going to go position by position. If we have time after that, we will touch on a few of the games and some of the things that we can think about in those game environments. And then we will hit the bottom-up build and get you out of here. Okay, so at the quarterback position, highest projected owned quarterback on the slate is Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray, a guy who, when I played him against Seattle in week 12, that was the 6-16 game, and spent that week talking about how Kyler's this barbell quarterback, Arizona's this barbell offense, barbell defense, where they tend to be, Kyler tends to be like 17 or fewer DraftKings points, 15 or fewer DraftKings points, or 25 plus, right? And very little in between. Cardinals tend to score 27 plus or 17 or fewer. Same thing with their defense. They tend to hold teams down or give up a lot of points. Now, obviously, the Cardinals are playing the Patriots this week, so we got a good shot at the Cardinals scoring points in this one, which means we have a good shot at Kyler putting up points in this one. So I don't think that Kyler is bad chalk. I think that he's bad chalk in the context of a lot of weeks that we would get, but solid chalk in the context of this week. Obviously, the concerns for Kyler are, how close do the Patriots keep this game? We know that the Cardinals run their entire offense through their run game, and then everything builds off of that. So their offense always functions better when they're able to run the ball, which they should be able to do this week. But also, if they're running the ball effectively enough, and if their defense is doing well enough against the Patriots, that might kind of be the end of what the Cardinals are doing. Obviously, they're going to throw the ball, but how much volume do we really see out of Kyler in a game that the Cardinals control? And so, is this a week where we only see 22 Kyler pass attempts, 24 Kyler pass attempts, in which case Trey McBride, who's trending to be the most popular tight end, doesn't really get enough volume to really hit. Marvin Harrison Jr., who's trending to be one of the most popular wide receivers, doesn't really get enough volume to be able to hit because the Cardinals end up controlling this game. And so one of the things that you can think about there is, okay, if I'm playing Kyler, what's the story that I'm telling? I'm probably telling a story of the Patriots keeping this game close. If the Patriots keep things close, Ramondre Stevenson often has a shot at the good game. So that's one way to play Kyler, is to throw Ramondre onto that roster. Another way to play it is to say, Patriots keeping things close through the air. One of these pass catchers, one of these cheap Patriots pass catchers could go onto a Kyler roster. And then you're playing this kind of B- chalk quarterback play that even at B-, he's one of the sharpest quarterback options on the slate. It's just the nature of what this slate provides. But you're at least doing it in a way that accounts for what that scoring environment ends up looking like if Kyler ends up putting up a tournament winning type of game. It probably is going to require the Patriots keeping things close for Kyler to be a true tournament winner. And so how can you tell that story instead of just playing Kyler in the same way as everyone else? Justin Herbert projecting for the next highest ownership. So Justin Herbert, 2 games all season of 20 plus DraftKings points. And I get it. Justin Herbert, really good quarterback playing against a Bucs team that tends to filter opponents toward the air. We're relying on Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh to actually call the game the way that we would like them to call the game in order for Herbert to see elevated volume, in order for Herbert to put up the type of score that you would really like from him in this spot. But that can happen, right? So Herbert kind of like a C+ option at quarterback. But again, given what this slate provides, C+ is kind of up there near the top of what we could be considering here. But again, you have a guy who has topped 20 points twice all season, tracking to be the second highest owned quarterback on the slate. CJ Stroud, also 2 games north. I think it's 2 games north of 18 DraftKings points all season. CJ Stroud has really struggled playing against this Miami defense. It's been lights out against quarterbacks, allowing the fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. I think that CJ Stroud is one of these that is sort of early, late, midweek ownership is going to be high. And then as we get deeper into the weekend, it'll be a little bit lower. And then as we actually get to Sunday and flip over the cards and see where players are owned, it'll be even lower than that, because his ownership right now is mostly based off of what's going to be spit up by projection systems based on implied team totals in this game and all that. I don't think that we'll actually see that type of ownership on CJ Stroud. We've got Anthony Richardson tracking for, so we'll skip over Tua and talk about him here in a moment. Anthony Richardson tracking for the 5th highest ownership on the slate, playing against the Denver Broncos elite defense. We've got Will Levis after that, obviously a really good matchup. But as we've talked about, oftentimes bad teams in the NFL, bad offenses in the NFL are bad because they beat themselves. We had this 20-year history of the Patriots playing DL, about 15 to 17 of those years. Patriots called a defense that was basically like, you know what, let's not be aggressive. Let's not try to force mistakes. Let's just recognize that if we force teams to march the field, most teams are going to beat themselves. They're going to take a sack that ends their drive. They're going to take a bad penalty that ends their drive. They're going to drop a pass. They're going to turn the ball over. Whatever it is, they're going to make some mistakes. And eventually, those mistakes are going to pile up to give us the advantage, because we're not going to make mistakes on offense, and we will be in control of this game. And the Patriots would get 8 or 9 wins per season just through opponents making mistakes and eventually becoming non-competitive as a result of the fact that they would beat themselves. Well, that's what we see with bad teams. That's why Jags playing against the Titans doesn't necessarily lead to elevated points. We're coming off of a game where Will Levis and the Titans managed 6 points against this Jags defense that we have been attacking all season. And now people are like, well, there's not really a lot to like on this slate. So the Bengals are bad. Will Levis is playing them. Okay, Will Levis, 6th highest projected owned quarterback. Can he hit? Yes, but I want you to see the fragility in this play this week, and that kind of speaks to the fragility across the board. Behind them, Drake May. Again, the ceiling's there, but what's likely to happen is being another 17, 18, 19 points from Drake May, coming in as the 7th highest projected owned quarterback. And so this is kind of what this slate is providing, right? Now let's drop down to the lowest owned quarterbacks on the slate. Among the lowest owned quarterbacks on the slate, Josh Allen, 3.2% projected ownership, coming off of a 54-point game, DraftKings scoring against the Rams. Patrick Mahomes against the Browns, who is Jameis going to have a big game here? He could. Well, if Jameis has a big game, don't you think the Chiefs are keeping this game close? So Patrick Mahomes certainly capable of having a breakout game here against an aggressive Browns defense that gives up a lot of big plays. Lamar Jackson coming in sub 2% ownership right now. Are the Ravens going to, in a game they should control against the Giants, are they going to ask Lamar Jackson to drop back and throw a ton? Probably not. Are they going to ask Lamar Jackson to run the ball a bunch and subject his body to unnecessary hits? Probably not. Is there a reason why Lamar Jackson's coming in at sub 2% ownership? Absolutely. But then when you look and see, man, all the popular quarterbacks on this slate, all the viable quarterbacks on the slate are kind of B- at best. Most of them are C+ plays, C plays. Well, if Lamar Jackson is kind of a C- play, but he's Lamar Jackson with Lamar Jackson ceiling and nobody's on him, couldn't that be the way that tournaments are won on this particular week? And then Jalen Hurts, where sub 1% predicted ownership right now. The matchup's not great. We know he's not going to throw the ball a bunch, but don't we think that the Eagles can still score 3 touchdowns against Pittsburgh? And if they score 3 touchdowns, isn't there a chance that that's 3 Jalen Hurts touchdowns and that 1 or 2 of those are coming on the ground and another 1 or 2 coming through the air? And so Jalen Hurts is this guy who, on paper, it makes sense that he's sub 1% ownership, but then you realize, okay, if we've got pretty fragile chalk up at the top of the quarterback position, and Jalen Hurts could pretty easily put up 28, 30 plus DraftKings points, isn't he a guy we could consider as kind of a unique way to attack this particular slate? We skipped over Tua, skipped over Jameis. I'll talk about Jameis in the bottom-up build, and we'll talk about those 2 quarterbacks in the player grid. But I like both those guys. I think that those are B- to maybe even B quarterback plays on this slate. I like them over Kyler and over Herbert, some of these other guys who I also think are kind of B- C+ plays. So all in that same range. You could rank them in whatever order you want. But for me, Tua and Jameis stand out on the slate. And then what stands out next to me is, okay, if I'm taking on some fragile plays at quarterback anyway, why not take on the fragile plays that people are not on? Why not take on the fragile plays that are going to be low owned and have high ceiling? Because maybe that's the way that we win on this particular week. Okay, over at the running back position, the running backs who stood out to me as I went through my research were Chuba Hubbard, Rico Dowdle, Derrick Henry, and Devon Achane. And then I was also, there were several other guys, Chase Brown, James Conner, Joe Mixon, Ramondre Stevenson, who were all kind of in this bucket of, I don't mind these guys either. They're not kind of the top 4 guys that are standing out to me, but I certainly wouldn't argue against ranking these guys in a different order outside of Derrick Henry, who obviously just has this monster ceiling in a spot where the Ravens should control this game and doesn't guarantee that he's going to have that 30-plus point production, but certainly a strong favorite to have a game like that in this spot, and more likely than a lot of the other players available on this slate. So Derrick Henry kind of in a different category. The rest of these guys, I don't mind re-ranking them however you want. And that's kind of, this is where I really started seeing okay, Chuba and Dowdle are my 2 favorite plays on paper. I don't like that, right? I come out of my research and it's and those were, that was an early game that I wrote up. And so it was okay, here's 2 running back options. And I keep going and I'm 7, 8, 9 games into my write-ups. And it's I haven't seen many other running backs I like, and then pulled everything from my write-ups. And it was really, Dowdle and Chuba are my 2 favorite running back plays on the slate outside of Derrick Henry. These are the 2 guys who are standing out the most. And then you look at ownership and it's they are the 2 guys who are standing out the most. They're projecting for the highest ownership on the slate, but this is the spot where we can say, what could go wrong, right? Chuba chalk and Dowdle chalk. Clearly, this slate could play out in such a way that Chuba chalk and Dowdle chalk are not the way to win a tournament. Furthermore, what are the chances of them putting up a score that you had to have in order to win, that you can't win without? What are the chances of both these guys putting up 30-plus DraftKings points? Probably pretty low, right? What we probably get in a good game from Dowdle is 17 to 21, 22. What we probably get in a good game from Chuba is something in that same range. Maybe he pushes up to 23, 24. But at their price tags, those are solid scores, but also not scores that will kill you if you don't have them. So can we consider building differently? Chase Brown, similarly, right? He's probably going to put up 21, 22, maybe he puts up 19, maybe he puts up 21, 22, outside shot at 24, 25, and his price tag 7,200 doesn't kill you to miss out on that. And he probably doesn't put up a 35-pointer or a 40-pointer. Can he? Yes. And so we need to account for that, but that's probably not what's going to happen. And that opens up these pathways for us to say, okay, what could we do differently on this slate? So we still have James Conner and Joe Mixon over 20% predicted ownership, not really getting too different with those guys. But when we drop down into this 10 to 15% predicted ownership range, we have Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, who's capable of putting up 30-plus DraftKings points with ease in this matchup against the Giants. Well, there's a way to maybe gain an edge on the field. And then we get these guys projected for 5 to 10% ownership. Devon Achane, Ramondre Stevenson, Tony Pollard, Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley, and Rashad White. Devon Achane obviously consistently putting up 19, 18-plus DraftKings points, but we know he's capable of 28-plus DraftKings points. Fits better in a Dolphins build than as a one-off, but certainly very much in play regardless. Ramondre Stevenson, when the Patriots keep things close, he's frequently getting pathways, shots at 17 to 24 DraftKings points. So again, that Kyler roster where you probably need the Patriots to keep this close in order for Kyler to be a tournament winning quarterback. Well, that means that Ramondre Stevenson is helping you tell that story. So Ramondre Stevenson, kind of interesting here. Tony Pollard, he's hit in games that the Titans won or last week that they controlled throughout. Less likely to be the case against the Bengals, but certainly a viable play. Kamara, we're 1 week removed from him being over 50% owned. Everybody wanting to play him, and now people are like, oh, I get it. Yeah, Kamara probably wasn't that sharp last week, and now we're moving off of him. There's a reason why I didn't play Kamara last week. There's also a reason why everyone wanted to play him, right? He's still a sharp play. The main reason I didn't play him was because he was over-owned relative to his expectations, and I felt there was edge in playing Saquon. That didn't really play out in my favor either, but at least I got the edge on the Kamara rosters. This week, it's Kamara's not too different of a play than he was last week, and now everybody's off of him. So talking about places where, yeah, the research doesn't say Kamara is a super short play, but now we can say, what about the strategy? What about what could win us this tournament? Kamara is still capable of putting up 30-plus points, and people are not going to be on him this week. Saquon, similar to Jalen Hurts, not a great matchup, but Is it going to shock us if Saquon rushes for 125, 135 yards? Is it going to shock us if Saquon scores 2 touchdowns in this spot? It shouldn't, right? And so Saquon very much in the mix as well. And then Rachaad White, who I think that this ownership will go up if Bucky Irving is out, but currently projected for sub 10% ownership, and another guy who should have a heavy role, heavy involvement in this game if Bucky Irving is out, kind of gives us a pathway around the field. And then we get sub 5% with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. So I get it. I get why we're not gravitating toward these guys. But then we start asking the question of, okay, but we're gravitating toward Chuba and Dowdle. And people are completely leaving Gibbs and Montgomery alone. And can't Gibbs score 35 plus at sub 5% ownership? Can't Montgomery score 25 plus at sub 5% ownership? And so ideally you want Monty to put up 30 plus in order to separate, in order for the risk that you're taking on to be justified. You want Gibbs to score 33, 34, 35 plus in order to separate, but recognize that these guys are capable of that type of game. So prefer Gibbs down here over Montgomery, but both these guys viable and fall into the same bucket as Josh Allen, where he might have to take over this game against the Lions, as Patrick Mahomes, where if Jameis is doing well, that could mean Mahomes doing well. Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, where it's like, okay, these guys don't stand out on paper. There's a reason why they're lower owned. And yet maybe the way to win this week is to just say, let me let go of some of this C plus, B minus chalk and play the C minus non-chalk that has a really high ceiling and people just aren't on it. And that might be the way to win on this particular weekend. Over at wide receiver, we're seeing a lack of confidence at this position. Currently, nobody projected for over 20% ownership, which is kind of unusual. You've got T. Higgins and Jamar Chase tracking for the 2 highest owned wide receivers, or 2 of the 3 highest owned wide receivers on the slate, where, okay, the Bengals are tremendous on offense. Joe Burrow's been awesome on offense, but these scores from T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, they're coming as a result of the fact that the Bengals defense can't stop anybody, and these are high scoring games. Are the Titans going to take advantage of that? Are we so confident in that we want to play Jamar Chase and T. Higgins as the two of the 3 highest owned wide receivers on the slate? So again, these are plays that, yeah, I see why they're 2 of the 3 highest owned wide receivers on the slate, but that's because of the context of the slate as a whole. And we can recognize the flaws in these plays, and we can recognize the potential edge in moving around these plays. Ladd McConkey, don't have much negative to say about him. Again, probably not, assuming he plays, assuming he's healthy, he's probably not going to bury you if you fade him. He's probably not going to put up 35 points or 30 points or whatever, where you're like, man, I had to play him. I couldn't win without him. Could put up 14, 15 points, and fall really shy of what you want in his price tag. But his likeliest range is kind of that like 14 to 22 points, and he probably gets into that range. So perfectly fine play there. Then we've got Calvin Ridley relying on Will Levis as the 4th highest projected owned wide receiver right now. Brian Thomas Jr. relying on Mac Jones as the 5th highest projected owned wide receiver right now. Also in the top 9 players above 10% projected ownership right now, Malik Neighbors relying on Tommy DeVito to get him the ball. Marvin Harrison Jr. in a game where people haven't been playing Marvin Harrison Jr. all season. And now they want to play him at ownership in a game that the Cardinals should control, right? And so you kind of see as we move down the line how flawed the chalk is this week. And again, this is not to say that the chalk is flawed and there's a bunch of really sharp plays going overlooked. This is a week where the chalk, and we've had weeks like that, right? Where the chalk is flawed and it's like, and these other plays should be chalk. The edge is just playing the sharper plays. This week, it's not like the edge is playing the sharper plays, but you are looking for the places where you can play plays with a lot of ceiling that people just aren't on. If we have a lot of volatility in the expected range of scoring on high-owned guys, then a lot of times the sharpest thing to do is just move away from some of those high-owned guys and grab some volatility on some lower-owned guys. Sub 5% right now, Keon Coleman, a couple games pushing close to 20 DraftKings points. He's supposed to come back this week in what should be a high-scoring game against the Lions. We know that the Bills have not yielded consistent, reliable, cost-sensitive, cost-productive, I don't know how we should say that, production, guys that you would want at cost. Khalil Shakir, Amari Cooper, Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman, none of these guys are producing games that you'd be thrilled with at cost, but Keon Coleman is capable of putting up a 25-pointer. And so coming back, and this is a good spot for him to do it in this game against the Lions. So Keon Coleman, sub 5% ownership, a lot of ceiling there. Terry McLaurin, sub 5% ownership. No Noah Brown. We know that the targets aren't really there for Terry McLaurin. We know the price is higher than it really should be on Terry McLaurin. And yet, what if he were 1K cheaper? What if he were 700 cheaper? Wouldn't he be a lot higher owned? And then we have the situation where, okay, what really matters once the game starts is the raw points that you get. If people would really like McLaurin if he were just a little bit cheaper, then maybe the fact that he's a little bit more expensive than people want to pay is good for me because now I get him at low ownership. So Terry McLaurin, we've got the Patriots wideouts and Kendrick Bourne in Kayshon Boutte, guys who people were on, right? We had the Kayshon Boutte week where the field was on Kayshon Boutte, OWS is on Kendrick Bourne. Kendrick Bourne hit. A week later, the field jumped over to Kendrick Bourne, and Kendrick Bourne missed, and now everybody's moved off these guys, right? It was like back-to-back weeks, everybody wanted to play cheap Patriots wideouts. Now everyone has moved on. Well, nothing has changed in terms of the fundamentals that led to people wanting to play these guys for those couple weeks. It's just that these guys are naturally going to be inconsistent pieces. But if we expect Kyler Murray to have a big game, then that means that we expect the Patriots to be chasing points. The Patriots who have been one of the more pass-heavy offenses in the NFL over the last month and a half. And so we would expect these guys to have opportunities to hit in this spot. So a couple other guys, coming in at low ownership. This one should change now that we have news that Cedric Tillman is going to miss, but Elijah Moore, as of this morning, was projecting for sub 5% ownership. Jalen McMillan, where it looks like Sterling Shepard probably won't play this week, and Jalen McMillan, the Bucs keep trying to find a way to get him involved. He spikes for these 7-8 target games. Quentin Johnston, if Ladd McConkey plays, obviously if McConkey misses, Quentin Johnston's ownership will spike. But if Ladd McConkey plays, people are not wanting to gravitate toward Quentin Johnston, who's had these couple 20-plus point games, a 25-point game this year. We know he's capable of putting up a big game at low ownership. And then even in the 5 to 10% ownership range, you got Tyreek Hill, you've got Jalen Waddle, you got Jameson Williams, you got Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, Nico Collins, guys with really high ceilings across the board in this range. And so same thing at this wide receiver position where we're seeing kind of fragile chalk. And so when we see that fragile chalk, we can say, okay, yeah, this other chalk these other plays aren't actually better, but they're also not significantly worse, and they're going to be significantly lower owned, or they have significantly higher ceilings, or we can have a correlated bet here that makes a little bit more sense. And so the edge this week is, in my mind, going to be far less about out predicting the field on who's going to have a good game and more about letting go of trying to predict what's going to happen, letting go of that thought that we can control this and get everything right on our own, and instead say, maybe the way that we get things right this week is by just letting go a little bit and looking at through low-owned players and thinking about ways that we can gain an edge as a result of that. Okay, I'm going to go game by game and just fire off some quick notes on all 12 games on the slate. Then we will get to the bottom-up build and get you out of here. So Cowboys at Panthers. This is a game where, on the Block Party show with Pete, somebody asked about Adam Thielen. And one of the things that I was saying was, watching these Panthers games, not just looking at the box score, but watching these games, Adam Thielen isn't in an upside role, right? The Panthers are kind of working the short and intermediate areas of the field. They're running the ball. They're playing balanced football. They're playing really well right now, right? They took the Chiefs to that last second field goal for the Chiefs to win it. They took the Bucs to overtime and would have won it if Chuba hadn't fumbled. They almost beat the Eagles. Xavier Legette failed to come down with that ball in the end zone that would have given them the lead with time almost out. And so this is a Panthers team that's genuinely playing well. They're favored at home against the Cowboys. And this is kind of a spot where I don't think that we see the Panthers proactively unleashing Bryce Young, right? The way that they've been playing these games is they're trying to control things. They're actually playing much better defense. Cowboys are also playing much better defense of late. And the Panthers are trying to control things, have Bryce throw when he has to, right? And the big plays that Adam Thielen has been getting, just as an example of this, have been these out of structure plays down the stretch run of the game where the Panthers are, in 2-minute drill or they're in comeback mode and Bryce Young's working out of structure and finding Adam Thielen open. And so what I would really expect in this game is kind of muted offensive production across the board with both teams playing through the run game. Obviously, both teams are going to pass it, but not necessarily looking for chunk plays as looking to be the team that's in control at whatever point in the game that they're at. And that means trying to not make mistakes, trying to play through the run, trying to, short area passing, and occasional, maybe each team takes 2, 3, 4 downfield shots to try to get something like a splash play going. But that's kind of how I see this game, which really just points to the running backs, and something weird's going to happen for this game to go a different direction. Chiefs at Browns. So the Browns, Jameis, 6 starts. He's thrown 40 plus times, and 5 of those 6 starts, the only time he didn't was in the snow, that heavy snow against Pittsburgh. So expectation is 40 plus pass attempts. And then obviously when Jameis is throwing 40 plus times, those are aggressive throws. Those are attacking throws. So there's the opportunity for interception, but also the opportunity for him to hit for some big downfield plays. So this low implied team total on the Browns, 19.5 points, to me, that plays to our favor because that's sort of this median range, but it doesn't speak to how high the upside is if things are clicking for the Browns. I think people are also going to look at this Chiefs defense and say, oh, this is a tough defense. Well, the Chiefs defense has been more bark than bite this season, right? They've been more reputation than reality. This season, they're a solid defense still, but actually in terms of DVOA, this is the softest pass defense that Jameis has matched up against so far. So obviously Chargers, Denver, 2 games against Pittsburgh. All of those are, I believe, top 8 in DVOA against the pass. Rough games against Pittsburgh, rough game against the Chargers, good game against Denver. And then the game against New Orleans, who's 12th in DVOA against the pass. The Ravens, who are 16th in DVOA against the pass. The Chiefs are 17th in DVOA against the pass. So certainly a spot where Jameis is capable of hitting for some big plays, some big gains. And if he's doing that, there's a chance that this becomes a back and forth game. Now, on the flip side, the Chiefs don't typically hit for big plays, right? That's how you beat the Browns, is they're aggressive. You hit them for big plays, but the Chiefs march the field. I believe they're still 4th in the NFL in drive success rate, which means how frequently does a new down series turn into a first down. So the Chiefs are really good at marching the field, and that can slow down a game. So if Jameis is throwing some early picks and then the Chiefs are able to march the field, this game could get shortened, and we end up with Jameis throwing the ball 31 times, 33 times, and the volume is just not there for the production to be there. Certainly a way that this game could go the other direction, but there's also a way that this game plays to the upside, and I think that's a really interesting way to think about this week. Dolphins and Texans, another one where kind of surprised to see the Dolphins as underdogs in this game, a Texans team that has played worse than their record all season long, and a Dolphins team that's been really hot of late, playing in a dome, so you don't have to worry about cold weather and all that with the Dolphins in this spot. I would expect the Dolphins to do well here. And another spot where you get this lower implied team total that's going to draw projection systems off of Tua and the Dolphins pass catchers. It might draw some of the field off of Tua and the Dolphins pass catchers, but this is a spot where they can certainly perform well against the Texans. And then obviously the Texans taking on this Dolphins defense that's just been lights out against the pass this year. Jets and Jags. So this is an interesting one in that Aaron Rodgers is not a stats guy. He's not, like, the fact that last week was his first 300-yard game since 2021 probably wasn't a big deal to him. Aaron Rodgers is about winning games. I think he cares about his touchdown to interception ratio. That has been something that he's been criticized for throughout his career. Maybe he doesn't take quite enough risks because of this pristine touchdown interception ratio throughout his career. But other than that, he's not a guy who's thinking about, hey, how do I go out there and rack up as many stats as I can? But this is a unique situation that the Jets are in, that Rodgers is in, where there's 4 games left in the season and the Jets season is over. They're out of playoff contention. They've been eliminated from playoff contention. And Aaron Rodgers is not going to be with the Jets next year. It's been made clear that they're going to be moving on from him. Davante Adams probably won't be with the Jets next year. And Garrett Wilson might not even be with the Jets next year. So in this game against the Jags, a typical Rodgers offense would say, okay, we're controlling this game against a bad team, against Mac Jones. And now that we're in control of this game, we're just going to stay in control of this game and manage our way to a win from here. But I do think that there's some chance that this week Aaron Rodgers is like, you know what? We're all out of town soon. We're playing the Jags. Like, let's party. Let's try to put up some stats. Let's keep throwing the ball. Aaron Rodgers has complete authority at the line of scrimmage to decide what the play is going to be. And he might just decide, hey, let's keep throwing the ball here. Let's get some touchdowns for Davante Adams. Let's get some big plays for Garrett Wilson. So I think this is a very interesting spot for Jets wide receivers, basically saying, like, yeah, most of the metrics we typically look at would point to this as a spot where the Jets probably won't have to throw a ton, where they won't have to be super aggressive, and where you don't want to play Garrett Wilson or Davante Adams. But what if? And this is a week where those what if questions really can pay off because the chalk at the top is kind of fragile. We don't want to take those what if questions trying to compete with really robust A+ chalk, because then it's like what we said this last week with Charbonnet and Garindo. It's like you go off the board and take somebody, and that off the board guy hits his low probability outcome of putting up 22 points or 25 points or whatever it is. And then it's like, and how does that help you? It doesn't. You're still competing against Charbonnet and Garindo at super high ownership as guys who are highly likely to hit. So that's not the week to try to move away from those plays. But this is the type of week to move away from some of the chalk plays because they're that much more fragile than normal. Commanders at Saints. Jaden Daniels, another guy coming in with low projected ownership. All season, we've been like, yeah, he's overpriced for his typical production, and that's true. But his typical production is still 22 points, 24, 25, occasionally 28. And on this particular week, that might make a big difference. And so Jaden Daniels in the spot against the Saints is interesting. I think people will gravitate toward Brian Robinson in this game. I won't make strong arguments against him. I will point out he's topped 18 touches only once all year. So clearly the Commanders are trying to manage his workload. I don't think Eckler being out changes that. I don't think that, I should say, could Brian Robinson see 22 touches? He has a game this year with 24 touches. So absolutely he could. But I think if we played out the slate 100 times, most of the time, Brian Robinson would still be in the 17, 18 touch range. So not much change for him. Still a good matchup for him. I think he'll be over-owned relative to expectations because of Eckler being out and people just thinking, oh, well, that makes this a good spot. But Jaden Daniels, interesting. Terry McLaurin, interesting. And certainly you can make a case that that Brian Robinson Jr. is interesting as well. Ravens at Giants. Ravens are 16.5-point favorites. We looked at this in DFS interpretations this week, but in games that the Ravens have controlled this year, Lamar Jackson's pass attempt totals have been low. Lamar Jackson's rush attempts have been low. That makes sense. The Ravens, if they don't need to pass, they like to play through the ground. And also, if they don't need to subject Lamar Jackson to unnecessary hits, why would they? The playoffs are coming up. They need to keep this guy healthy. So probably this game plays through the ground. Probably this is not a Lamar Jackson game, but there are opportunities here to say, yeah, but what if? What if this is like the Lions versus the Jags? What if this game just plays out differently? What if Lamar is called on to throw the ball 35 times and the Ravens say, hey, let's just keep our offense sharp. Let's keep doing what we typically do. And then all of a sudden, you've got nobody playing Zay Flowers. You got nobody playing Mark Andrews. You have nobody playing Lamar Jackson. And maybe that's the way that this game plays out. Obviously, what's likeliest is we get Derrick Henry here, but I don't think you should totally discount the idea of Lamar Jackson. And the larger the tournament field, the more entries you're competing against for first place, the more it makes sense to go off the board on something like this. Bengals and Titans. Bengals implied for 25.5. So about 3 touchdowns. The question is, does Joe Burrow throw 4 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns in this game? Does Chase Brown score 2 touchdowns in this game? If one of those things happens, then all of a sudden the Bengals become this really viable and valuable offense. If instead this solid Tennessee defense and this bad Tennessee offense leads to a game environment that's implied by the implied team totals here, right, 20 to 25, something in that range, then all of a sudden you're probably overpaying for Burrow, overpaying for Chase, overpaying for Higgins, even overpaying for Chase Brown. So you are betting on the Bengals smashing the Titans here, and I think it's important to recognize that because these guys are going to be high owned, you're making that bet. And so there's nothing really that you need to do from there in terms of how you tie that in with the Tennessee side, because just because Tennessee is getting smashed doesn't mean that Ridley is hitting. You could play Ridley on a Bengals roster, but you don't have to play Ridley on a Bengals roster. But just recognize the bet that you're placing isn't that the Bengals score 3 touchdowns. It's that the Bengals exceed their implied team total, that they score 28, that they score 31, that they score 35 plus in the spot. And if that happens, then these pieces become really valuable. Patriots at Cardinals. Cardinals implied for 26.25 in this game right now. Obviously, Cardinals, as we've talked about, barbell type of offense. They score a bunch of points. They score very few points. This is a spot where they're likelier to score a bunch of points. And then the question becomes, who do those points come through? And is there enough volume for the Cardinals passing attack for Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey McBride to be adding the catches and the yards to whatever touchdowns they might be able to grab here? So Cardinals, solid offense, going to draw a lot of ownership attention this week, probably produce solid scores across the board. Among Kyler, Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison Jr., and James Conner, probably 3 of those 4 put up a solid score. Do any of them put up a tournament winner? I think they're underdogs to do so, but so is basically everyone else on this slate. So you could go with chalk there. Like I said, try to play that chalk in a sharper way than the field is playing it. Try to tell a story. Maybe Kyler double stacks with Patriots wide receiver bring back, or with Hunter Henry bring back, or with Ramondre Stevenson bring back, whatever that might look like. But do something that tells a more comprehensive story and is a little bit different from what the field is doing there. Colts and Broncos. This is a game where if the Broncos are controlling this game on defense, then you probably don't see a ton of aggressiveness from Bo Nix. So Cortland Sutton's still viable, and that's really it outside of the cheap with upside swings on Marvin Mims, on Troy Franklin, which are also viable. But there is a way that this game plays to the upside But Anthony Richardson plays well. It's kind of the Shane Steichen effect, right? Maybe Shane Steichen figures out how to manage this offense to points. And then all of a sudden, Bo Nix is having to get more aggressive, and you have some pieces from this game that could be more interesting. So this is a game where viable one-offs, plural, not really, but viable one-off in Cortland Sutton from the Denver side. And then again, you can consider Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin in this cheap with upside type category. Guys who can score from anywhere on the field are going to see 3, 4, 5 targets in this game. And then you could also say, okay, there are some ways to point to this game environment developing into something. It's pretty low likelihood, but certainly could happen. Bills and Lions. So this is the type of spot where 5 years ago, everybody would have jumped on the Bills after last week. Now people go the other direction where it's like, oh, I don't want to jump on the Bills just because they had a big game last week. Likeliest scenario here, right? The Josh Allen's topped 30 points once since week 3, and it just happened. Khalil Shakir put up 24.6 DraftKings points last week, and that's the first time that he's been useful at his price. He had a 23-pointer as well, but first time that you really, want that you had that 4x salary multiplier. Same thing, down the line. Like we said, Keon Coleman hasn't cracked 20 points, but he's gotten close. Amari Cooper hasn't topped 16.6. Dalton Kincaid, I think it's 13.1 that he hasn't topped. So you're really not getting the points from the Bills because of the way they're calling this offense. And typically Josh Allen's not needing to do enough for him to be viable either, right? Same thing on the Lions side. They have so many weapons that they can put up 30 points, and it doesn't mean that anybody produces a solid tournament score at cost. And so certainly makes sense that the field is not on this spot. But then you start looking at it like, what's the one game on the slate that could just totally blow away all the others? Well, it's this one, and the field is not going to be on it. So then we think about, okay, what if this game doesn't combine for 54.5 points, but combines for 64 points, combines for 70 points, combines for over 70 points? How do we build for that scenario that nobody else is building for? Because that's, you get one thing right and you're in position to win the slate this weekend, because most of these other games are probably not going to shoot out. We could see none of these other games shoot out, and then this is the one game you had to have. So a very interesting game to think about and pay attention to this week. Bucks and Chargers. You got the Bucks playing against this good Chargers defense, a Bucks team that has been much more run reliant since Chris Godwin went down. Baker constantly 29 to 33 pass attempts, whereas before he was regularly getting up to 40, 45, 50 plus pass attempts when Chris Godwin was out there. And obviously yardage is down as a result of that. And then this tough matchup against the Chargers. Chargers side, we know that teams typically throw the ball more against the Bucks. Are the Chargers going to do that? That's not high confidence that the Chargers are going to do that, but they probably do. And then the question is, okay, so who's available on the Chargers? Obviously Stone Smart, because he's 2,600, is going to grab a lot of attention. Not the only cheap tight end out there. He's a viable play. There are other cheap tight ends that are also viable this week, but Stone Smart, Ladd McConkey, people are going to just think, okay, the volume is going to be there, and it might be there. So I think that these guys are perfectly fine plays. They're on my list. These are Ladd and Stone Smart are two of the guys who, from the research, it was like, okay, these guys are on my list. But again, they're kind of C+ plays, and the field is going to be heavy on them. So is there edge in just going different directions? Or is there edge in playing Quentin Johnston with Ladd McConkey healthy? Is there edge in attacking this game in different ways, and the field is thinking about attacking this game? And then finally, we have Steelers and Eagles. Eagles implied to score 24.25, so not really that low. And we know the Eagles are not going to have heavy pass volume. And we know that the touchdowns are going to come through Jalen Hurts or Saquon Barkley. So isn't there still a pretty good chance that one of Saquon or Jalen Hurts puts up 25 plus DraftKings points? I don't think the field is going to be thinking that as much as they should. And that's one of these places where we might be able to gain an edge on this particular week. So again, you see, it's a very unique week. It's a week where, to me, the picture in the puzzle box is, how do I move away from predicting what I think is going to happen? How do I move away from, these are my favorite plays based on the research, and they're popular, and they should be popular in the context of this slate, but are there any B or B plus plays in the bunch? Or is it like my favorite plays in the bunch are B minus, and then everything else is C plus and C? And why not go to maybe the C minuses that have tremendous upside and really low ownership? And I think that we're going to see some unique things winning tournaments this week. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe in the small sample size of 1 week, a lot of this fragile chalk ends up hitting, and just building through that fragile chalk ends up being the way to go. But if we could play out the slate 100 times, what would make us the most money over that stretch would be thinking outside the box a little bit. And we kind of have the answers to the test because of ownership projections that will develop as we get closer to Sunday. of understanding where we can get different from the field and maybe gain that significant edge. Okay, bottom up build. So if you're new here, we build with a 44K salary cap. This is a great thought exercise and helps us see ways that we can pile in a bunch of upside on a 44K salary cap roster, makes things easier for us when we build with a 50K salary cap roster, challenges our brain in positive ways. If you want to build with a 44K salary cap roster, do it. We have the bottom up build contest. So obviously it's a free entry, still a 50K salary cap on DraftKings, but you have to keep your roster below 44K or 44K and below. You can find the link to that in my player grid or in the BUB challenge channel on the OWS Discord. 150 edge points to first place, and that is $150 on OWS, 75 edge points to second, and 40 to third. So cool prizes, real prizes in terms of free stuff on OWS, free to enter, and a good opportunity to kind of build with a 44K salary cap and just challenge yourself a little bit. So we kind of skipped over the Jameis stuff a little bit. To me, Jameis just makes so much sense this week. And so we've got these 6 Jameis starts. Recognize that typically, or actually, let's look at it like this. Typically, DraftKings prices players in such a way that they're going to hit roughly 4x their salary, roughly 25% of the time. This year, it's been more because of the nature of scoring in the NFL. It's been more like they're going to hit roughly 20%, roughly 4x their salary, roughly 20% of the time. So in order to get one spot right on your roster to keep you on a 200-point pace, you're going to get that guy 20% of the time. But in order to get a second guy right on your roster who's not correlated to that first guy, well, you've got a 20% chance on that first guy, but also an independent 20% chance on this second guy, which means that the chance of getting both of them together is 4%. So you could say that this season, generally speaking, your chances of getting 2 uncorrelated, unrelated spots on your roster correct to keep you on a 200-point pace are about 4%. But then to get a third spot on your roster correct is another 20% of that 4%. So now you're at 0.8% chance. And then to get a fourth spot right on your roster, that's 20% of that. So you're looking at a 0.16% chance. So 0.16 goes into 100 about over 600 times. So it's like a 1 in 600 chance of getting 4 unrelated spots on your roster correct. A 1 in 600 chance. Okay, let's look at Jameis. So Jameis has played 6 games under center. In 3 of those games against the Chargers, 2 games against the Steelers, he underwhelmed, right? Even one of those against the Steelers was 17.3 points. Another one against the Steelers was 15.5. So not bad games at a 5,500 price tag, but it wasn't these tournament winning types of games. The other 3 games, Baltimore, New Orleans, Denver, he put up big scores, 27.6 against Baltimore, 29.6 against New Orleans, and 39 against Denver. Here's what's wild. Jameis hits because Jameis is throwing for heavy volume and is attacking downfield. So in PPR scoring, heavy volume means lots of opportunities for catches. Attacking downfield means lots of opportunities for yards, which means, this is what we talk about this a lot. A lot of times when you see the alpha wide receiver on a team have his best game of the season, you actually check the box scores in that game and recognize that the number 2 wide receiver on that team had one of his best games of the season, as did the number 3 wide receiver, because it's not just from that wide receiver seeing additional volume and having a big game and a good matchup. It's from that team as a whole doing well through the air. So the wide receiver 1 might be seeing 4 or 5 more targets than normal, but the wide receiver 2 might be seeing 3 more targets than normal. And the wide receiver 3 might be seeing 3 more targets than normal. And they're also in this off matchup, and the quarterback's cooking and the defense is off balance. And so everybody's benefiting. So here's what's wild. Jameis, in all 3 of these games where he hit, 50% of his starts so far, Jameis triple stacks. Jameis plus 3 pass catchers has kept you on a 200+ point pace. In the first game, it was Jameis plus Tillman plus Elijah Moore plus Njoku. In the second and third games where Jameis hit, it was replaced Tillman with Judy. So it was Jameis, Judy, Elijah Moore, and Njoku. 2 of those games, they kept you on a 218-point pace against this week's salaries And another game that kept you, the Denver game that kept you on like a 290 something point pace. It might have been 298 that they kept you on. Obviously, that's the outlier here. But if we're saying that getting 4 spots on your roster correct, just uncorrelated, I like this player, I like this player, I like this player, I like this player, is about a 1 in 600 chance that you're going to get all 4 guys right on a roster together. And yet, getting Jameis plus 3 pass catchers right on a roster together has been a 50% proposition. 1 out of every 2 times you've gotten that right over Jameis's starts. You see how dramatically you turn the math in your favor by just playing Jameis triple stacks. Furthermore, we've got news that it looks like David Njoku will not be playing. Furthermore, we've got news that Cedric Tillman will not be playing. So all of a sudden, we have Michael Woods, who played 63 out of 70 snaps last week. He's obviously going to be on the field 100% of the snaps again. But without Njoku, you have more opportunity for Woods to get some of the targets. And then Akins is stepping in for Njoku, so maybe he gets those targets. Do you have to even choose between the 2 of them? Could you play a Jameis quadruple? To me, in any contest of 2,000 or fewer entries, I don't mind just playing the Jameis quadruple and saying, okay, these 2 guys, Michael Woods and Jordan Akins, they combined to cost $5.9K in salary. Well, we've been running these numbers off of Njoku, who's $5,100 in salary, and Cedric Tillman, who's $4,900 in salary. So we're not adding that much more in salary in terms of our math on, is this keeping us on a 200-point pace? And you're actually probably picking up a few extra points, right? And so we're going to get to this point where Judy's going to gain popularity because Tillman and Njoku are out. Elijah Moore is probably going to gain popularity because of that. But people are probably not going to realize that both times Judy's hit, Elijah Moore and Njoku also hit. Jameis also hit. The time when Tillman hit, Elijah Moore and Njoku also hit. Jameis also hit. And so people are going to play this one-off Judy, this one-off Elijah Moore, as opposed to adding Jameis and taking that free bet that they're getting there, adding another pass catcher and another, and maybe even another. So this bottom-up build, we start with Jameis, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, Michael Woods, and Jordan Akins. And here's what's wild. With the salary spent, we are probably able to keep ourselves on a 200-plus point pace on a roster with a 44K salary cap, right? So just tremendous value here. I should say, if we're spending 44K in salary, that 4X salary multiplier ends up keeping us on more like 176 point pace, 180 point pace. So in terms of getting 4X from these players or over 4X from these players, they're keeping us on a 180 plus point pace, we would say, on this roster. And on top of that, they are allowing us flexibility to play Derrick Henry at 8,300 on a roster that's going to have a 44K salary cap. So Derrick Henry goes onto this roster. I throw Rico Dowdle onto this roster. The Broncos defense, because really like the Broncos defense this week, consistently scores double-digit points playing against Anthony Richardson at home. And then that allows us to round things out. So I wanted Chuba Hubbard at first. I went down to Rico Dowdle because if I played Chuba Hubbard, that was really squeezing us down at this last wide receiver spot into bad value. Instead, we're able to play Jalen McMillan, a guy who, especially if Sterling Shepard is out, is going to be, underpriced for his expected role. So before he got hurt, he was seeing 7 targets, 8 targets. Then he came back, kind of worked his way back in with 2 and 3 targets, but 7 targets again last week. And certainly if Sterling Shepard is out, Chris Godwin's still out, Jalen McMillan is very much in the mix here. Now, another way you could play this is you could take out Derrick Henry and say, maybe Derrick Henry puts up a solid game, 26 points or something, but I can get that from somebody cheaper. And then you go from Derrick Henry down to Chuba Hubbard. And then you have basically an extra 1,900 to work with. From that Jalen McMillan spot, you would have 5,600 and below that you could work with at wide receiver or another running back or however you wanted to handle that position. But there's so much flexibility on this roster, and we've spent 43.9K in salary. We've spent 43.9K in salary with a roster of, let's say we're going 50K salary cap, right? Now we've got Jameis quadruple stack that very easily can and might even be a favorite to keep you on a 200-plus point pace at cost, right? 4X salary multiplier, you had the score of Jameis, Jeudy, Elijah Moore, Michael Woods, Jordan Akins. Add the scores together, add the salary together, say, is the score 4X the salary or more? Like, there's a better than 50% chance that the answer to that is going to be yes on this particular week. So you're on a 200-point pace, and then you've added Derrick Henry, and then you've added one of the sharper running back plays on the slate in Rico Dowdle, or even go up to Chuba Hubbard at 6,500, and you've got 9.4K left over in the flex, and there's no players who are that expensive. Saquon Barkley's 8,600, Jamar Chase's 8,400. And so just to illustrate like how much salary flexibility you're giving yourself with this Jameis quadruple or even with one of these Jameis triple stacks this week. And so, yeah, really like the starting point for a bottom-up build, really like the starting point for a roster in the, real main slate contests on DraftKings this week. And so final roster is Jameis at quarterback with Judy, Elijah Moore, Michael Woods, and Jordan Akins. Rico Dowdle and Derrick Henry at running back. Broncos at defense and Jalen McMillan, kind of our only salary saver type guy on this roster, not in terms of the salary spent. Obviously, Michael Woods and Jordan Akins are cheap guys, but they fit in with this Jameis quadruple thesis. Jalen McMillan, the only kind of one-off guy that we're taking that's kind of got a low floor but a high ceiling. And so Jalen McMillan rounds this out. We spend $43.9K, leaving us with $6.1K in salary, more than we could even spend. We'd have to move up from Rico Dowdle to like a higher cost running back and then take one of these wide receivers that we like. So yeah, a lot of fun that we can have with these Jameis builds this week. With that, I'm going to get out of here. I will see you. Already recorded the block party with Pete Overzet, so you can find that on YouTube. I'll be recording the solo ship with Squirrel Patrol. After this, you can find that on the OWS YouTube channel, OWS podcast feed, which is where you're watching or listening to this. Then you can find my player grid in the scroll this evening on Friday evening. You can find the rest of our scroll content throughout Friday evening and throughout the day on Saturday. And so, thanks for hanging out. I will see you on the site throughout the weekend, and I will see you at the top of the leaderboards on Sunday.